All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here in the United Nations SDG Media Zone. We're here live at the Web Summit in Lisbon, Portugal, live on UN Web TV, broadcasting to the world on several social media platforms. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dan Thomas, the Chief Communication Officer from the United Nations Global Compact, and I'm pleased to be joined by Christine Ntim, the Chief Marketing Officer from Startup Ecosystem, and Siyabulela Mandela from Nelson Mandela University, the great-grandson of Nelson Mandela. We're honored to have you both. And we're here to talk about Fast Forward Africa. We're here to talk about the innovation that's coming from the African continent and driving the Sustainable Development Goals, ultimately and hopefully, as we move towards our 2030 deadline. First of all, Christine, maybe if I could start with you. What are you doing to drive innovation on the African continent?
Yes, I mean, for us, what we're doing to drive innovation on the African continent is two things. One, train the next generation of entrepreneurs who are innovating through our accelerator programs. We accelerate about 1,000 companies across 90 different countries, but a huge focus on entrepreneurs from Africa. And of course, we also run the largest tech summit communities around the world. So for this year, we have about 38,000 people going through our international summits around the world. And out of the 23 summits that we do, 10 of them is across Africa this year. And a lot of times people talk about innovation. We were talking about this earlier, Silicon Valley, London, and New York, but we're not looking at the kings of Africa, whether it's Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. And so we're bringing people from the corporate sector, the government sector, different stakeholders around the world to come down to Africa, different countries, and see tech innovation happening live, to meet the entrepreneurs locally, to meet the innovators locally. And that's how we do it through our accelerator programs and through our tech summits. And we've been moving at an exponential rate. To think that we started with 1 summit in 2017, 8 last year, 23 this year, 54 summits around the world next year, and 20 across Africa. So obviously Africa is a huge part of our platform, right, to scale and really showcase innovation, but also to really rebrand the narrative around Africa and innovation as well.
That's an extraordinary acceleration, and actually gives me a little bit of optimism that we might be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if we can accelerate at that kind of pace. And of course, we are going to need that kind of rapid acceleration to be able to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Siyabulela, first of all, I should congratulate you on your wonderful victory in the World Cup Rugby. That was a great moment. As a British person, I was, of course, horrified to see South Africa thrash England so easily. But congratulations on that. I'm sure that means a lot for your country and, in fact, the African continent. So that's...
No, thank you. It definitely, it's one of the watershed events for the South African community, a country that emerges out of serious racial divisions and instability. I think it came at an opportune time when the country is battling with economic issues, when the country is battling with racial divisions that seems to be in the rise. Once again, we're seeing another, probably to a certain extent, a resurgence of apartheid in South Africa. So it plays as a symbolic role to unify the nation under one banner. So it, like Nelson Mandela did when the Springbok won in 1995, it played a significant role to forge unity within the South African communities. So I think it came at the right time when we are really in need of a uniting force in South Africa.
And tell us about the work that you're doing at Nelson Mandela University around SDG 16.
Well, I'm at Nelson Mandela University at the Department of Politics and Conflict Studies. In the university, we are more concerned at training Africans on how do we best find innovative ways to deal with instability, conflict within the African continent. We've trained quite a number of professionals who are working in different conflicts in the country, and the South African government, we have trained also South African politicians on how to best intervene in instabilities and conflict in the African continent. We've been in DRC, for instance, since 1998 until today. We are currently working also in South Sudan. The South African government is also working in South Sudan, and we are in close contact, and we're also working in Lesotho to try to find innovative ways to deal with the instability in that particular country. Basically trying by all means to replicate some of our experiences through the negotiation process from 1990 until 1994. So we're trying by all means to assist other countries who are going through the very same difficulties that went through as a country, and how do we best find innovative ways through dialogue. How do parties that are in conflict find a space and find a table to negotiate themselves out of instability, out of poverty, and out of conflict as well?
And with that in mind, why have you come to the Web Summit? What are you hoping to find here in Lisbon at the Web Summit that can contribute to your work in that area?
No, well, I think we all know that the Web Summit is one of the greatest stage, and in particular for those who are in the tech industry. But one of the things that people tend to overlook is an intersection and the link between technology and governance. How do we then lobby those who are within the tech industry to assist government to find innovative ways to deal with some of the challenges that bedevil the African continent? So I'm here as a representative of, I'm not only representing myself and my university, but I'm representing my continent. I'm here to explain, and I'm here to lobby those who are within the tech industry to come and invest in tech companies in Africa and come and assist Africans in finding innovative ways to address their own issues in their own continent.
Thank you. Christine, do you think that message is getting through? Do you think there's enough attention about the innovation, the talent, the extraordinary acceleration that you've described on the African continent?
I am proud to say that whether you understand the innovation that's happening in Africa or not, it is happening. It's a train that is moving extremely fast. As a matter of fact, the title of this panel is called Fast Forward Africa. And our mission in terms of running these accelerators and tech summits, last year we talked and announced about the Africa Future Summit in partnership with the Africa Future Fund. We talk a lot about Africa as a continent based on its history, which, by the way, the narrative needs to change. And now we're talking about what does the future of Africa look like the next 10 years from now, the next 50 years from now, the next century from now. And knowing that the African continent has always been innovating, but how do we change the narrative through tech and innovation? And so for us to be working with the biggest brands, one thing we talk about is that the reason why I believe we accelerated so quickly, aside from the fact that from my accent you think I'm American, but I'm actually Haitian American, I'm say Haitien. My partner, my husband, is Ghanaian. The diaspora is hugely focused on embracing that African culture and being in talks with what's happening on the African continent. So one thing that we've seen is, right now with this Africa Future Summit tour that we're doing to 12 countries this fall, what we've said is the mandate is change the narrative of Africa, one. Two, talk about real innovation that's happening across the African continent and not the narrative that's been told. Right now, if you think about Ghana just launched its first satellite a couple of years ago, and it was 3 local citizens who've done that. My husband just talked about this at a previous panel about the fact that even corporates coming into Africa, they're not coming for charity, they're coming for business. Orange, if you are from someone from the France economy, actually was also going bankrupt a couple of years ago. They went to Cote d'Ivoire and actually revived their economy and their company by coming into the African continent. Other examples, you can see Google AI just launched in Ghana, not because they want to make an impact, but because it's business. Business is booming. If you look at the population in Africa, the majority is under 35. You have a workforce population where 1 billion on the continent exists, and that's growing to 2 billion in 5 years. The population, the future of the world now depends on the African continent. And so you're seeing a workforce population that is innovated at a rapid scale. We do not believe innovation the same way as Western markets because we grew up on mobile technology. We don't interact with the internet on desktops, which means our pace of innovation is as fast as opening your phone. And so for us to see that rapid scale of innovation and engagement, we said SDGs number 17, partnerships, because now you need to remove the ego, you need to remove your bias, and we're partnering with Google, Facebook, IBM, Forbes is our production partner and traveling across Africa with us to find these stories. And so when people see our exponential growth from 8 to 23 summits to 54 summits next year, people realize when they see the brands that we work with, it's because there's a shift happening culturally. When you travel the world, you hear American music, local music, and Afro beats. So there's a cultural change where people are interacting with the African narrative differently, which means the business narrative, the tech narrative is also changing as well. And we see that firsthand at the Africa Future Summit tour that we're doing, but we're also seeing it at places here at the Web Summit where one thing that people have said is like, we don't see enough Africans represented at major conferences like this. Right. Keep in mind, we're here. Right? We're here and we're taking the ideas, we're engaging with people because one thing about Africans, we're very friendly. We're very welcoming. We don't boast. But this is our year to boast. This is our time for Africans, and we feel that now. And so for us, we've been moving very rapidly with that mandate.
Siba, that's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Well done. You're giving me goosebumps.
My energy is
coming
coming
next
out
to you
now.
is extraordinary, exactly. Siba, Siyabulela.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I've got to get that right. Siyabulela. How do you feel about this acceleration? Do you, as a young man growing up in South Africa, have you seen this sort of exponential surge from your generation as a generation ready to take on the opportunities that technology and innovation has presented?
Yes, well, definitely there's been quite a lot of interesting development in the South African space and in particular in areas of tech and small business enterprises. And in fact, we've rallied our government to support small businesses for the future of South Africa depends, and the future of the African continent depends on its development and its and how do we best use the resources, the richness, and the rich resources that the African continent has for developmental purposes. For the longest time, Africa has been a country where the Europeans and the rest of the world have been exploiting our resources through colonialism, have been exploiting our resources through the apartheid regime even in South Africa. Now it is the time to use those resources in the South African, in Africa for the further development of the continent itself. And the future of Africa is within its young people. So it is of paramount importance for governments and different institutions to invest in the young people in the African continent. For the future, it is with us. That is why we are here even today to say Africa is ready and is open for business. We are here to lobby them. We are here to lobby those in Europe, those in the West to say, come and invest in Africa. Come and join us as we take the world forward. For even the future, I could argue the future of the world is within the African continent. So if they come to Africa, that's how we're going to move forward.
That's a great response. Christine, give us some examples about some of the exciting sort of innovation that is coming out of Africa to some of the places that you've mentioned.
I mean, where do we begin? I mean, to be accelerating so many companies virtually and running these tech summits, one thing I always say is some of the innovations, I would start by saying, when you think about Silicon Valley as a tech hub of innovation, you create solutions for problems that fit your needs. And for a very long time, innovators in Africa was creating solutions for the world and not for Africans, and by default for the world. And so now we're creating solutions for ourselves. So how many of you have heard of Jumia? Right? Amazon tried to scale in Africa. Jumia beat them as the first unicorn. Why? Cash on delivery. Because culturally speaking, we don't have mobile payments, but yet we have mobile money. And we also have a culture of paying on the spot based on arrival. So you look at Jumia became the first unicorn on the African continent by understanding that we need to build solutions based on our problems. And by default, that application is actually being applied in Europe, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and in parts of the US. And so that's one example of what's happening where we're building innovative companies to fit our needs. Second, going back to that example I showcased about what Orange did from France to come into Cote d'Ivoire, you're seeing many corporations and foundations are seeing Africa as a place to not only pilot the ideas, but actually really scale their ideas. Because like I said before, When we look at populations of growth as an innovative company, you usually target the US because you have 300 million people and you have a surplus where they could buy these products. But what's happening now in the African continent, when you build and scale for Africa, you're actually already building and scaling for the world, because there's so many different perspectives, there's so many different cultures that's coming into the African continent. For those who don't realize, if you don't believe that Africa is really moving forward in terms of innovation, look at the plane ride of people coming into countries in Africa. It's extremely diverse. You see all different nationalities coming in to start businesses, to scale businesses, and then tell some people, yes, Africa is open for business, but Africa is also open for disruption, which means you need to think differently when you think about Africa and investing in Africa, where you're not coming in for 3 weeks and say, oh, I couldn't build a business, so Africa is not ready. Because Africa is 54 different countries, and how you build in South Africa might be different than how you build your company in Nigeria versus Ghana and the like. And so when we're looking at innovative companies like Jamia Foods, right, or even like the satellite launched in space by 3 local citizens in Ghana, we're seeing that more innovation is happening at the grassroots level, where once they make mainstream media, that's when you see all the support. And that's something that I would say that's still sad, where the economy in the U.S. is built on supporting innovation. So if you're seeing all these innovative practices that happen on the African continent without an economy to support it yet, imagine in 2020, when we have this decade for Africa, what that will happen to the exponential rate of companies, but also platforms, corporations coming into Africa to scale. MTN, I'll give you a final example. MTN actually launched mobile money payments in Ghana last year that went viral. Not yet have you seen any mobile company on the planet done a mobile payment platform like MTN in Ghana did. And so now other mobile telecom companies are doing the same thing, actually trying to crowdsource equity capital for the grassroots. And I'm talking about literally from $1 donations through the MTN mobile money to raise capital for a corporate telecom company giant of the country. So you're seeing examples at the grassroots startup level, but also at the corporate level as well. And again, people are inspired to make an impact, but also make business that actually also generate impact in these countries as well.
Finally, Siyabulela, do you think that the energy, the transition that's required for the achievement of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, do you think that drive is going to come out of Africa? Do you think Africa is going to basically save the planet through their own innovation and creativity?
Well, I think definitely Africa does have a capability to showcase a different type of energy, to an energy that will redirect the world towards a proper place and create a better place for all. I think Africa does have that opportunity. What would further need in Africa is a support from our institutions, from our government, in particular supporting the innovative ideas by young people. For that's where the future, that's where the gold is. The minute our government change their perspective and begin to support innovative ideas as advanced by young people, and it is that type of energy that is needed. It is that type of energy that is readily available from young people. It only needs a push and the support from our institutions and support from our governments in different parts and different states within the African continent. And I believe we do have that energy.
Christine, the last word for you.
I'll quickly add, because I really want to make sure that people understand this and really embody this. When you look at the 17 development goals on the back, remember the Millennium Development Goals of 2015 was really targeting developing economies. And then they reset it for 2030. Now the whole world has to take part together as one society to talk about how do we impact humanity for the future through these 17 goals. If you want to accomplish these 17 goals on Africa, you do it for the world. Because I know you're watching the news. There are riots happening in countries around the world. Ecuador is a fail set. Venezuela, Haiti. And because we're having a crisis on our hand where literally unemployment is through the roof, you're seeing jobs. People are going to school for jobs that won't exist for tomorrow. We now need to be more connected about the fact that these 17 goals, we need to have a united front. Because if anyone who ever played on a team, because I used to be an athlete, when one play, you are as strong as your weakest link, right? And so when you're only focusing on Western markets and not looking at what's happening in Africa, the whole world suffers. And so when thinking about what's happening with the Sustainable Development Goals, think about how can you partake in Africa. For those who are diaspora, you don't have to move back. You can engage. For Friends of Africa, how do you partner? How do you scale? Because the world is moving and seeing Africa in a completely different light now. The narrative is changing, and we're proud to be a part of it. We're proud to be moving it and accelerating it. And for us, I'm emotional about this because as someone who grew up in Haiti, married my husband from Ghana, and actually been traveling across the African continent, I am shocked to see what we didn't know about what's happening in Africa when it comes to impact, innovation, technology, and scale. And it's only on an uptake from here. So hopefully you guys are seeing this and really challenge the narratives that you've been told about Africa, because it's no longer the same. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing Africa to us, to the SDG Media Zone, and here to the Web Summit in Lisbon, Portugal. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.